Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Bo again, and welcome to the Roads with Bo. Today is July 4th, so obviously, today we will be talking about the roads to the Declaration of Independence. And we're going to do this in a number of ways. Obviously, we'll read it a little bit later. But we're also going to talk about some timelines to kind of separate out American mythology from American history, because a lot of things that people believe about July 4th, well, let's just call them less than accurate. And then there's some things that people may know logically, but they don't understand the significance when it comes to the timelines. And then we're going to discuss the Declaration of Independence as the first foreign policy instrument of the United States. Because many times on this channel, when we do a deep dive into something, the foreign policy aspects are pretty important. And this kind of sets some tones. Okay, so starting off, it's a matter of a timeline. And this is one of those things that people often, they know the dates, but they don't see the significance. People look at the Declaration of Independence as the start of the American Revolution. And in one way, sure. But it's important to know that Lexington, Concord, the shot heard round the world and all that happened in April of the previous year. The fighting had been going on a year. And when you think about it, sure, okay, so they didn't have the Declaration. But it's more than that. Those people who fought at Lexington, at Concord, at Bunker Hill, Moores Creek, they weren't fighting the American Revolution. They were fighting a rebellion. They didn't want to separate, most of them at that point. That wasn't what was on their mind. They wanted better treatment from the king. That was the goal. As far as revolution goes, that really didn't become a widespread thought until January of 1776, when Thomas Paine put out Common Sense. That's when that idea took hold. So it's important, as far as context, to understand that in the beginning, the colonists weren't fighting a revolution. They didn't know they were, anyway. They didn't know they were until Thomas Paine told them they were. And then you saw a shift start to occur. Now, the other thing is what people imagine July 4th is. When you talk to people, it's the day, the leaders of the colonies decided to declare independence. Not really. That's not entirely accurate. Well, it's the day the Declaration of Independence was signed. John Hancock and all that. Yeah, that's not actually accurate either. So, to cover that real quick, there was something called the Lee Resolution, and it was introduced on June 7th. In relevant part, it says, "These united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved." So that was adopted on July 2nd. So that was when the leaders really decided to declare independence. That was going to happen already. As far as the signing with, John Hancock and all of that, yeah, that doesn't happen until August 2nd. In between July 2nd, when the Lee Resolution was adopted, and July 4th, there were some revisions, but the important thing that happened on July 4th, this, aside from the official adoption after the revisions, was that it went to the printer, Dunlap, and the next day it was dispatched out. July 4th is really proofread press release day. That's when it was, I mean, sure, you can say, the revisions were really important and that was the change, right, but the idea that we were going to try to separate, that was July 2nd. The official signing of the very pretty text, that was in August. Okay, so now that we've cleared that part up, as far as a instrument of foreign policy, sure, it was to declare independence from a foreign power. That's certainly foreign policy. But it also was put out there to tell the other people, the other countries that are at that international poker game where everybody's cheating, we're going to put in our ante. And if you have some issues with Great Britain, maybe you want to slide us some chips. That was part of it. And then the other part was to rally the troops. Because, again, they've already been fighting for a year. And after Paine put out Common Sense, there was a lot of pressure on revolutionary leaders to be, more revolutionary. And this helped in that regard too, as far as propaganda for the war effort. Now, the document itself, it's divided up into 3 sections. You have the preamble, which is what most people are familiar with, when in the course of human events and all of that stuff. Then you have the grievances. It's a list of complaints. It's exactly what it sounds like. One of the interesting things about that is that if you pay attention to what they're saying, understand a lot of those complaints, they haven't exactly been resolved. And during that process, you will also see a glimpse of one of America's original sins. And then the last part is the resolution, the conclusion. That bit about sacred honor and all of that. Okay. So, in Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its power in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable then to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. Okay, so we have now made it through the preamble, and we are entering the grievances. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish their right to representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers incapable of annihilation have returned to the people at large for their exercise. The state, remaining in meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriation of land. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us, in many cases, of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress. In the most humble terms, our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which would define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. And now we're kind of moving in out of the grievances and into the resolution, the conclusion of it. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must, therefore, acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have the power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So, that's the declaration. When it is taken in historical context, one of the things to remember is that these were the original promises that were laid out. As time went on, some of the promises were fulfilled, some weren't, some changed, and the view of the United States of some of these promises led some of them to become more important. Those unalienable rights, the idea that all men are created equal, they were held up. But one of the things that has kind of fallen away, that people don't recognize about the Declaration, is that government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. The idea is that government was there to serve the people, not to oppress them, not to limit them, not to say, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. It was there to provide a service. It was to affect their safety and happiness. So, there you go. There's a little more information, a little more context, and having the right information will make all the difference. Y'all have a good day.